So Sal, can the sharp maker sharpen a serrated knife?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We have some serrated knives here, and the serrated knife is only sharpened on step 3.
Oh, okay.
Because the fine corner of the radius of the white stone will allow it to go in and out of the teeth. Now you can use the gray stone, but the gray stones remove a lot of metal. And if you sharpen a serrated knife with the gray stone and you're going very quickly, then there's a good chance that you could distort the serration.
Oh.
So when you're sharpening a serrated knife, you do it the same way. This process is the same. The blade is held straight up and down, and you draw it towards you from the heel to the tip. You want to slow down your motion, though, because you don't want to be skipping the teeth.
Okay.
Now here there's a couple of points of view, and I'm going to give you both of them. If you'll notice, the serration is only ground on one side. The other side is actually flat. So the first way is to just sharpen it like a regular plain edge knife. One stroke on one side, one stroke on the other side. That will produce the strongest edge because it'll be 40 degrees. It won't be quite as sharp as that very narrow edge that it came from the factory. Some people like to maintain that. The way to do that is to sharpen about 3 or 4 strokes just on the side that it was ground.
Okay.
Now what that will do is cause a little burr to form on the other side. So after 3 or 4 strokes on one side, just one stroke on the other side will cut that burr off.
Okay.
And that's the way you would sharpen one of the single bevel grinds, the kataba, or what we call the chisel grind before. You would take the side that has the grind and just do 3 or 4 or 5 strokes, and then one there to cut off the burr. And that way you can maintain a very sharp edge. With the serrated edge knife, what you're trying to do is actually sharpen with the inside of the tooth, and that's what the stone allows you to do, get inside of there.
Well, that doesn't look too hard. Can I try it?
Sure.
Okay. So I hold it just like I would to slice a tomato? Okay. Is this red?
No, slower.
Okay.
There you go.
You're right, this is
You're an
easy.
expert.
Wow. Great, thanks.
Sharp.
Sal, I've got a flexible knife I use for filleting fish. Will the sharp maker handle something like that?
That's a good job. This is a fillet knife. It's quite flexible. With flexible knives, we just use the corners of the stones. Because the knife is flexible, it's pretty hard to stay on the flat surface.
Okay.
So you would use step 1 just to set your edge like you would with normal knife. And as you apply pressure, make sure to stay even on the edge. So when you get down to that edge, you have to kind of apply a little more pressure to one side.
How much pressure do you apply?
It's about 3 pounds, but you'll actually feel it. It's
Just enough
something.
you've got drag?
Yeah, you'll learn to feel it. It takes about 4 or 5 knives to get the hang of a tool. After you've taken probably 4 knives from step 1 all the way through to step 4, then the motion will become easier. The straight up and down will become easier, and then handling something like this is just a matter of making sure you've got pressure right out to the tip, because it's the very tip of the knife that you want to have very sharp.
It doesn't take a lot of pressure. You're not trying to muscle your way through it.
Pressing harder doesn't make it sharpen faster. So there is an optimum pressure, and that we find most people get that down pretty good.
Okay. Good. I've had that knife for a long time, and it just gets duller, but I hate to throw it away.
No,
that's good information.
I'm sure you can make it sharper than it was when it was new, and get a lot more use out of it.
Okay, Sal, now I have a good one for you. I have an electric knife that just gnaws instead of slices. Can the sharp maker handle that?
Yeah, again, it's a serrated knife. This is an electric knife, and if you'll look at them closely, you'll find they come apart.
Okay.
So
they were meant to be sharpened?
Right.
Oh, okay.
So you have a single bevel on this side, and then this side's flat. Take the side that's ground and do it just like a serrated knife. Now here you notice, Jerry, that it's a little flexible, so I'm applying a little more pressure so that I can get right out to the tip. Probably 5 or 6 strokes, and then just lay it right flat on there. The other side, lay it right flat on there, and just go right down. What that will do is cut off any burr that develops.
Okay.
And then you do the same thing with the other side, but because it's ground on the other side, you'll sharpen the other side the same way.
That makes sense.
And then you'll just flatten it out on the other side the same way. Probably, I would say 20 or 30 total strokes on each side will bring your electric knife, again, sharper than it was when it was new.
Gee, I thought I had him stumped.
No.
Sal, for the most part, we've been dealing with conventional knife blades. Will the sharp maker handle something like a hawkbill or a linoleum knife or a hatchet or something like that?
No problem. Hatchets are generally working very hard, so it doesn't pay to use the white stone. You can if you were in a contest, where you were racing somebody, but generally speaking, steps 1 and 2 will do it. And you'll do it the same way, starting at the rear and working to the other edge. And again, I would use the corner of the stone until it'll catch your nail or catch the side of the sharpener, and then you go to the flat side of the stone and just continue on the flat side of the gray stone until it'll cut a piece of paper. That's about as sharp as you're going to want to hatch it, because as you start hitting wood, that very fine edge breaks down very quickly. For a hawkbill, this is one of the few sharpeners around that will do it, and this one is serrated, so I'm only going to use step 3, but if you're using a plain edge hawkbill, then you would use step 1 and 3 only.
All right.
Because you're working an inside curve, and so it really doesn't pay to use a flat surface. And you would do it the same way. Notice a little bit of twist at the wrist, just so that I can get the tip.
Right.
If you were doing a hunting knife, for example, that had a belly like that, and you were doing it the same way, then you might do a little twist up the other way.
Okay.
But with a linoleum knife or any of those odd knives that have that inside curve, then the corners of the stones would be the way to do that.
Sal, I'm really impressed with the versatility of the sharp maker system. I think I could probably sharpen most of these knives myself now. I really appreciate this.
No problem, you're welcome.
Okay, Sal, you said that the sharp maker can handle scissors, so I brought along several different kinds. Some ordinary scissors, some pinking shears, and some thinning shears that my hairdresser asked me to bring along.
Sal also brought a pair of tin snips. Can we handle those too?
Sure, no problem.
Let's start with the ordinary ones.
Okay, if you look at the end of the tool, you'll see another hole is there. This is designed to handle a triangle, and if you look, there's an angle set there at 12.5 degrees. You only use 1 stone. Basically show you how we do this, and you would use steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 just like you do with your regular knives. I'm only going to use step 4 here just to show you how it works. Remember, with knives we kept the blade straight up and down.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing here with scissors. We're going to keep the blade straight up and down. Bring the tool to the edge of the table. That way you're not going to stab the table. And just as you do with a knife, go from the heel right to the tip.
Okay.
Over and over. And both sides would be done the same way. Just turn it over. The other shear blade is exactly the same. Just do it the same way. Now, while you're sharpening just on one side, as we did with our kitchen knives, it's possible to develop a little burr. Now, a lot of people just close the scissor and that cuts off the burr, and that's okay. However, if you want to get a little more specific, if you lay the blade right on top of the stone and just cut the burr off.
And just do that once?
Well, once or twice. Okay. Yeah, as long as the stone is flat up against the shear. You don't want to be turning it up this way, or you're going to just take that edge right off. And tin snips would be done exactly the same way. The blade is held straight up and down and drawn across the stone from the heel to the tip. Both sides are done the same way, just like you do your shears. And there you may or may not want to take off the burr. Again, the choice is yours. Most people like to check them on a piece of paper. See if you can just do that. That's the normal test. One of the tests that I like to use is take a piece of felt, pull it apart, and you get a really fine fuzz. If a shear is very sharp, you should be able to trim that fuzz quite easily. Then you know your shear is sharp. For thinning shears,
yeah, if you can sharpen those, my hairdresser will love you. I don't know how you're going to get all those individual little forks.
You don't do it that way. There's two cutting edges. One has a little fork that doesn't do any cutting.
Oh.
That just grabs the hair to keep it from sliding out.
Okay.
This is the only side that you do your sharpening on.
Oh.
And you do that just on the flat surface. If you use the corner of the stone, it'll go in between, and that's not what you want. So you just use the flat side of the gray stone to set up the edge, and then you use the flat side of the white stone exactly the same way. Just from the heel to the tip and just coming right across.
Okay.
And again, you can deburr using the same method of laying it flat and then just coming right across.
Okay.
Now, pinking shears are a little different.
Yeah, those pinking shears are so dull. They just gnaw the material instead of cutting it.
It's possible to put the stones right there.
Oh.
And this is higher than the top of the handle. Now, with a pinking shear, you've got a flat surface on the bottom of both sides.
Okay.
That flat surface is laid right across the top. And just keeping it straight up and down, come right across from the heel right to the tip.
Okay.
And again, both sides are done just like you do your regular shears. Now, I usually use the gray stones until they're sharp enough to cut a piece of paper. Just continue sharpening on the gray stone until they'll cut paper. And then I go into the white stone, and I use the white stone until they'll cut a piece of felt or silk, something really hard to cut.
Oh.
Now, there are some shears that have a very thin angle, whereas most shears would be set at 12.5 degrees. A pair of professional barber shears, for example, will generally be sharpened at a much thinner angle. So rather than keeping the blade straight up and down as you would for a regular shear, you kind of lay it over until you find that angle, and then just sharpen along that angle the same way that you would a regular shear. And again, you would deburr the inside the same way that you
lay
would.
it flat.
Right.
So you have to do that kind of by feel to find the flat
Yeah,
spot in
but
the blade.
normally it's a pretty wide angle, so it's easier to find.
Geez, this is great. We're learning a lot.
Sal, before we get started on the shop tools, this is an old razor my dad had, a straight edge. Can we sharpen something like this?
Sure. A little bit of education here, so let's show you how it works. The little hook at the back is so that you can hold it this way. Now, it's generally these three fingers and your thumb that are working the blade. The handle just kind of out there. It allows you to get to all the little areas that you need to.
Okay.
The only purpose of the handle is to protect the edge. And when you get one of these sharp, you don't touch them. And I'll explain why in a minute. If you look at it closely, you'll see that there's that hollow ground we talked about earlier. The spine of the razor is thicker so that when you lay it down, the angle created by the thicker spine is perfect at the edge. So when you're sharpening, you're actually leading with the cutting edge like this. You always lead with that cutting edge. You go back and forth, laying it flat until you get a pretty good edge, something that'll shave hair off your arm, for example.
Okay.
But at that point, it really won't do a good job on hair on your face. You have to strop it. And in the stropping process, what you do is you take the softer steel that this is made out of, and you bring that burr out. And that's done using a leather strop. Some people will use a fiberglass or various types of strops are made, but I always prefer leather. And you strop the opposite way that you sharpen. You trail with the cutting edge. And what you're doing each stroke is you're pulling out a little bit of that burr. Now, under a microscope, that burr might look like a briar patch, but that's what works the best when you're shaving. But because it's a very, very thin burr, if you were to touch it, for example, with your finger, you would bend it over and you'd have to go back to square one, even if you break it off.
Okay, now that it's sharp, how am I going to test it without having to actually shave with it?
Tomorrow morning.
I'll give it. We'll see
That's
what
the way
happens.
to do it.
Hey, thank you.